Some apologies are not about mistakes. They're about staying safe. There are people who say sorry when no harm was done. They apologize for asking questions, for needing time, for speaking up, for taking up space. And if this sounds familiar, it's usually because at some point in life, apologizing became easier than explaining yourself. This isn't about politeness. It isn't about being kind. And it certainly isn't about weakness. It's about psychology. People who apologize excessively are often deeply attuned to others, sometimes painfully so. They notice changes in tone, the pause before reply, the subtle shift in facial expression that most people miss. Their nervous system is always scanning, not for physical danger, but for emotional disruption. Somewhere early on, they learned that harmony depended on them, not true harmony, emotional stability. They learned that tension meant they had done something wrong. That discomfort was theirs to fix. That silence was a warning sign. So, when the air feels even slightly off, they reach for an apology before anyone points a finger. This habit rarely comes from low confidence alone. It almost always has a history. For many, over-apologizing develops in environments where emotions were unpredictable, where approval felt conditional, where love seemed tied to behavior. In those spaces, being good didn't mean being honest. It meant being agreeable. It meant not upsetting anyone. It meant learning when to shrink. Apologizing became a shortcut to safety. When a child learns that conflict leads to withdrawal, anger, or emotional distance, the brain adapts. It stops asking questions. It stops pushing back. It learns to surrender early, not because the child is wrong, but because being right once felt too costly. So instead of asking, "Did I do something wrong?" the response becomes automatic. "I'm sorry." Over time, this stops feeling like a choice. What's often misunderstood is that people who apologize too much are rarely careless. They're usually thoughtful, conscientious, and deeply reflective. They replay conversations long after they end. They analyze their tone, their wording, their timing. They carry a quiet sense of emotional responsibility that never fully shuts off. Psychologically, this connects to something known as hyper-responsibility. It's the belief that you are accountable not only for your actions, but for everyone else's emotional reactions. So when someone sighs, you apologize. When someone grows quiet, you apologize. When someone misunderstands, you apologize. Not because you cause harm, but because discomfort feels dangerous. There's also an identity layer beneath this. Many people who over-apologize see themselves as the easy one, the adaptable one, the one who doesn't cause problems. And that identity can feel comforting, especially if being difficult once led to rejection. But over time, that identity becomes restrictive, because constant apologizing sends an unspoken message to the brain. My presence is an inconvenience. The mind believes what it repeats. Another layer that rarely gets discussed is self-awareness turned inward too sharply. Instead of observing the situation objectively, the focus collapses inward. What did I do wrong? How did I mess this up? Was I too much? This isn't responsibility. It's fear. Fear of being seen as difficult. Fear of being emotionally unsafe. Fear of being rejected for existing honestly. So, apologizing becomes emotional management. The apology lowers tension. The conversation moves forward. Relief follows. But the relief is temporary. Over time, something strange happens. People who apologize too much often feel invisible, unheard, resentful without knowing why. Because apologizing doesn't process emotion. It compresses it. And compressed emotions don't disappear. They wait. Another powerful factor is fear of escalation. Some people apologize not because they believe they're wrong, but because they fear what happens if things continue. They want to stop discomfort before it grows, before it becomes emotional, before it becomes unpredictable. That belief often comes from earlier experiences where small misunderstandings turn into emotional chaos, where expressing needs led to guilt, where disagreement didn't stay contained. So the nervous system learns to shut things down early. Ironically, this habit can create imbalance in relationships. Frequent apologies can confuse others. Some may start to assume wrongdoing where none existed. And over time, one person carries emotional weight while the other unconsciously holds authority. There's also a quiet struggle with entitlement to space. Not entitlement in an arrogant sense, but in a human one. The belief that you're allowed to exist without justification. Many people who over-apologize don't consciously dislike themselves. They may be competent, capable, even admired. But deep down, they often feel the need to soften their presence, to cushion their words, to preempt rejection. So instead of saying, "I need help," it becomes, "Sorry to bother you." Instead of, "I disagree," it becomes, "I might be wrong." Instead of, "That hurt," it becomes, "Sorry, I'm probably overthinking." Each apology slightly shrinks their truth. From a psychological perspective, this pattern is often rewarded early on. They're praised for being polite, for being mature, for not causing conflict. But maturity isn't the absence of conflict. It's the ability to navigate honestly. Avoidance can look like kindness on the surface, but internally, it creates tension and exhaustion. Constant emotional monitoring is draining. It requires vigilance, restraint, adjustment. That's why people who apologize too much often feel socially exhausted. Not physically, but mentally. Over-apologizing isn't always verbal. It shows up as over-explaining, justifying decisions, softening opinions until they barely resemble the original thought. These are all variations of the same belief. Being misunderstood is dangerous. Being disliked is unacceptable. But when apologies become constant, they lose meaning. The brain stops distinguishing between real mistakes and normal human presence. Everything starts to feel like a fault, and this quietly erodes confidence. People hesitate before speaking. They question their instincts. They filter emotions before they're even felt. At its core, over-apologizing reflects an unspoken question. Am I allowed to exist without minimizing myself? For many, the answer once felt uncertain. Change doesn't begin by eliminating apologies overnight. That usually triggers anxiety. The nervous system resists abrupt shifts. Change begins with awareness. Noticing when an apology is about accountability and when it's about fear. Noticing when sorry replaces honesty. Noticing when discomfort is mistaken for wrongdoing. Discomfort is not danger, and it doesn't always require fixing. The shift happens quietly, in a moment when the apology almost comes out, but doesn't, not out of rebellion, out of self-respect. At first, this feels unsettling, because apologizing once worked. It maintained peace. It avoided escalation. So when the behavior changes, the nervous system reacts. Tension rises. The urge to backtrack appears. This doesn't mean the change is wrong. It means the strategy was deeply ingrained. As unnecessary apologies decrease, internal space opens up. At first, that space feels uncomfortable. Silence lingers. Others are allowed to hold their own emotions. Slowly, something stabilizing happens. You realize not every discomfort is yours to manage. Not every reaction is your responsibility. Relationships shift. Some deepen. Some become strained. Boundaries often feel lonely at first, not because they isolate, but because they reveal. There's also a change in self-perception. When apologies soften, clarity grows. People hear themselves more clearly. They notice emotions that were once smoothed over. Allowing those emotions to exist without fixing them builds emotional tolerance. And tolerance creates grounding. Healthy accountability doesn't disappear. Real apologies still matter. What disappears is reflexive self-blame. Communication becomes clearer. Words become simpler. Presence becomes steadier. Each time someone doesn't apologize when no harm was done, they reinforce a new internal message. My presence does not require permission. This isn't a loss of softness. It's a refinement of it. People who apologize too much aren't trying to manipulate outcomes. They're trying to prevent loss. But connection isn't earned through perfection. It forms through honesty and mutual tolerance. As the habit loosens, self-compassion grows. The same understanding once reserved for others is finally extended inward. Confidence emerges quietly, not loud, not performative, just steady. The urge to apologize may never disappear completely, Old patterns soften slowly. Progress isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. The goal was never to stop caring. It was to stop disappearing. People who apologize too much don't need to change who they are. They need permission. Permission to take up space. Permission to feel without fixing. Permission to exist without explanation. And that permission begins inside,